We're back, 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring is still here with me. He didn't up and run away in anger because of my technical difficulties. So I apologize. We're back, like I was saying. NBA bold predictions in the middle of the first hour. We're going to do Humor Me Please to round out hour one, and then Chris Brown is going to join us for the podium, the final five, and the most interesting games of the weekend in the second hour, and we'll get out of here on a Friday. Mr. Doring, I'm going to ask you again how you're doing and how you feel about the Patriots just absolutely failing you yesterday.
I'm disappointed, not going to lie. I'm to the point where we were talking about quarterbacks yesterday and the different places that might need one and the different guys that could potentially be available with the Eagles making their quarterback change and what's going on with the Jets and the fact that they're in line to draft Trevor Lawrence, but there are still people in the NFL that believe in Sam Darnold. It's time for the Patriots to do something different at quarterback, and that was the beauty of this Cam Newton situation was there you have nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. You needed a quarterback. You can't argue with what Cam has done in his career, the athletic ability he has, the raw skill he has. He's better than the other options that were available, but it also is not something where you had to commit long term because of the questions with the injuries and him not being the same player he was at age 23, 25 when he was as good as any quarterback in the NFL.
Right.
That's the beauty of this is you got to see if it worked, and if he came back and was playing at an MVP caliber level, you had the inside track to re-signing him. But if you needed to bench him because things weren't going well and this offense wasn't generating more than 220 yards of total offense and 113 passing yards, you could go to Jarrett Stidham. There are no repercussions. You're not in the position the Eagles are where you have a quarterback you're paying face of the franchise money to sitting on your bench.
Right.
This is a guy on a cheap 1-year deal.
Right.
But that was more than anything else. That was sort of where I came down on this game. We can get to the Rams side in a second because that's interesting as well. But we forgot to mention the Patriots in terms of teams with an unstable quarterback situation moving forward. That could be a very, very interesting landing spot for particularly Sam Darnold or maybe Wentz. I still tend to think the Eagles are going to give Wentz another chance. I like the idea of giving Bill Belichick Sam Darnold, though. Mm-hmm. I'm not willing to give too much credit or to say that Tom Brady is winning this divorce until we get Belichick with a quarterback that can do the things that he wants. And there are things that Cam Newton can do your typical quarterback can't, but they can't throw the football right now. It's not good enough to me. Maybe this was the plan all along, but you put Cam out there to see what would happen. You're not winning a Super Bowl this season anyway with that roster. Mm. It's in a period of transition. I don't think this says too much about Belichick, but they got to be looking for other options at quarterback heading into next season.
The game was over one play into the second quarter because you get 10 unanswered points from Jared Goff and the Rams. They march down the field in the first possession of the game and score a touchdown, and then they get another field goal. And then Kenny Young, on the worst screen pass I've ever seen. The worst screen pass I've ever seen. It was like, well, my guy's kind of there, but instead of throwing it at his feet because he's only kind of there, we're going to lob it up so that literally anybody on the field can get to it before it actually hits the ground. Kenny Young was the one that got to it, and he took it back for 79 yards. The game was over right there. The Patriots don't have the offensive ability to come back from a 17-0 deficit. At the same time, though, the reason that this game wasn't close is because the Patriots were horrible in the red zone. Horrible. Of course, yep. You had a couple turnover on downs. The second one came, late in the game when you're just trying to kind of tell yourself that there's still a chance you win this football game. But they turned it over on downs, basically on the goal line in the first half. There's, they get a field goal there, but they were 0 of 4 in the red zone. And when you're, because they didn't have an awful time moving it in the middle of the field. They had some big runs. Cam Newton made some passes, not a lot. He only completed 9 passes, but it's not, they didn't score 3 points because they just literally couldn't move the ball. They only scored 3 points because they didn't capitalize on the times that they did move the ball. And there aren't very many teams in the NFL at all that can afford to not capitalize on the opportunities that they get in the red zone. The Patriots are certainly not one of those teams. And that's why you end up getting a score that's as lopsided as this one. When, watching the game, it didn't feel quite that way because, you give up a touchdown when you're in the red zone, right? And it was after, there was a big run on that possession to get the Patriots down into the red zone. And then you just throw that pick. So that possession turns from, getting yourself points and you're down 10-3 or 10-7 into you're down 17-0. And when it's this Patriots team, you just don't have faith in that team right now to come back from that kind of deficit, especially when the deficit happens the way that it did, and there's a pick six. And they're just, right now, 29 carries for 107 yards just isn't good enough for New England right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of teams, if you get 100 yards on the ground, then most teams have a quarterback, at least most good teams have a quarterback that is going to also throw for 230 yards or something, and then you're talking about roughly 350 yards of total offense, and that's functional. But when you don't capitalize in the red zone, when you let Cam Akers run all over you, and you make mistakes like they did with the football, it's easy to see why this game was so lopsided when, on the surface, they probably right. The possession was fairly even, right? 28 minutes to 31 minutes. The Rams had 7 more first downs, but it was 17-10. Neither team was an offensive mastermind in this game. Sure, New England only had 220 yards of total offense, but the Rams only had 318. It wasn't like there was the Patriots had more drives. The stat box isn't as lopsided as the score would suggest the box score should be. But when you're the Patriots, you just don't have that kind of margin for error.
And you go 0-3 on fourth down,
right.
And specifically in the red zone. That's the other really concerning part of this for me, talking about the Cam Newton angle of this. That's what he does. If there's one thing that separates him from every quarterback, maybe ever in the NFL, it's the ability to get short yardage, to get the yards that are really difficult to convert on 4th and 2, because he's just so difficult to bring down in short yardage situations. That's got right. He has to be that for the things you're going to sacrifice in terms of throwing the football and having a more electric offense, having to be run centric.
Mm-hmm.
To accommodate where he's at in his career and the quarterback he is right now. The trade-off for that, from the positive standpoint you're hoping for, is we're going to be really good in short yardage situations. We're going to be really good in the red zone. All of those sort of specialty things. Having Cam Newton, who can run and pass and is just a ginormous human being, that's the advantage.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're hoping to get in exchange for not having a traditional quarterback who's going to give you 250, 300 yards passing. And to your point about the Rams offense.
And then on top of it, they were sacked 6 times, so it's not like they were really being protected either.
Right.
I mean, Stidham had 7 pass attempts but got sacked twice, right? I mean, it's just that's not good enough either.
Aaron Donald was great.
Yep.
That defense was really good. They definitely won the battle.
Mm-hmm.
And we were also talking about the quarterback competition yesterday, and the fact that whoever played better's team was probably going to win. I mean, probably Goff played better,
but not by much.
Right. That's still my question: is can he put together 3, 4, 5 really good games in a row to go beat the Seahawks and then the Packers and then the Saints or something like that in the playoffs? But the way everybody else is playing, and this newfound weapon they have in Cam Akers, because Cam Akers was the difference maker in this game.
He ran for 100. How many total rushing yards does he have this season?
Yeah, it's not very many.
It's 528. He rushed for 171 yards last night, and he's only got 528 for the season.
And almost half of those would come in the last 2 weeks. He has
Right.
243 yards on 50 carries his last two games.
Right.
Sean McVay has said you're the guy now, and he's been really good. That team, the talent level is still exceptionally high on that team.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods at the receiver position. They're pretty. I mean, they're good around pretty much across the board. You've got difference. Obviously, the best defender in football in Aaron Donald. Some playmakers in the secondary with Jalen Ramsey. The question is just, can the quarterback play be good enough? Doesn't have to be great, because clearly Goff is one of those guys you can win a Super Bowl with. They got there.
Which is part of the reason why his struggles are so. Head scratching is not the right word because Jared Goff has never blown anybody away. But it's not like anything has especially changed from. I mean, we were talking about Jared Goff, the, possible future MVP that season because he was so consistent, because he was so good, because, like you said, he looked like a quarterback that you could win a Super Bowl with. And I think inherently, if you're that kind of quarterback, you're also a quarterback that has a chance to win an MVP. And so, it's the same coach, it's the same player. It's not like he's been riddled with massive injuries, and that's part of the equation. It's just, I think, there's more film on him, and he's just sort of returned to the mean a little bit, right? There's usually a reason, whether it's age or switching teams or having a different coach or all of your weapons being taken away from you. Some things have changed, of course. Todd Gurley, it's certainly a part of that. You don't have one of the best running backs in the NFL on your team anymore, or at the time was one of the best running backs in the NFL. But the point being is that, right, I think it's part of the reason why I Jared Goff still isn't quite in that category of quarterbacks that I'm not sure I can depend on. Or I'm hesitant to really put him into that category of I can't depend on this guy, because he's been there before, and he also just has these moments when he does have good games. I mean, last week he was really, really good. 37-47 for 351 yards. He has these moments, but then he also has times where we're having this conversation about, especially in the NFC, when you have to go through, in theory, well, both conferences, but in terms of quarterbacks, you look at it and you say, okay, you have to go through Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees, all three of which have won Super Bowls and all three of which have proven that they can perform in the playoffs. Jared Goff has too, by definition, but you still have these conversations because he's much more inconsistent than those three guys are.
Yeah, he's just not an elite quarterback, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it goes back to the point that you made yesterday. That is one of the things I'm really interested in with this team moving forward, and now with Kansas City as well, with Mahomes' contract kicking in. Now, there's a difference because you were always going to pay Mahomes that money because he's actually worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you continue? And the Rams have had to get creative salary cap wise to continue to improve this roster. Can you keep up this talent level around him when you have to pay him like a franchise quarterback, even though he doesn't always deliver for you to that degree?
Mm-hmm.
But I really like Sean McVay. There's part of me that just doesn't want to rule out the possibility that this team can get back to a Super Bowl.
Well, and the other thing is that they're 9-4. Even if Jared that matters, right? Regardless of how Jared Goff has actually looked on the field, they're 9-4 and leading a division that also has the Seahawks and also has the Cardinals.
And take out the 49ers.
Right.
I mean, look at what they've done.
Right. And they've managed to lose to a 49ers team twice that is without all of their best players, essentially, which is part of this conversation, right? Because he was horrible in that second 49ers game. But I think to your other point, I think we're gonna know by the end of the regular season how we're gonna feel about Jared Goff in these playoffs, because they've still got the Seahawks and the Cardinals. There's still a world in which they cough up this division because they have head-to-heads with teams in also in their division. They get the Jets next week. That's going to be a win. But you go at the Seahawks, you play again against the Cardinals, and right, if he doesn't perform in those two games that are as close to playoff games in the regular season as you can get when you're talking about trying to secure your division, I think we'll either be leaning towards we feel good about Jared Goff, our quarterback, for these playoffs, or we're leaning towards, okay, Jared Goff is on the metaphorical hot seat because he struggled down the stretch, and if he struggles in the first round and the Rams don't win a playoff game, then we might be having a different conversation.
Yeah, you're kind of stuck with it though, regardless of.
Well, right, but we're talking about this. You just said that we're talking about, is this guy worth the franchise tag? That's the point I was making.
Okay, right. From a perception
because
standpoint.
Since the Super Bowl, he hasn't been exactly spectacular.
Right.
And this is clearly a football team that their biggest quote unquote hole, or the place that they give up talent, is at the quarterback position. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that was my point. Not that there's actually they can do about it right now.
Right.
But you're not going to pay that guy all that money if that's really how you feel about him.
Right. And you also were hoping to see the continued development. Now, what he was doing that one season, it's unfair to expect him to continue to perform at that level. But McVay seems to very much believe in him. Mm. There's a high level of trust there, or else they wouldn't have invested the way that they have in him. And it still hasn't sort of gotten to that next level. It's sort of stuck in neutral, at least to a degree, where it's not always bad, mm-hmm. to put it in the simplest terms. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's fine. Their roster's good enough to win with fine some of the time. But there is that question, and just this idea of, can McVay get more out of him? And is it too late to think that he can get closer to being the player he was at the beginning when McVay got there? Because that's the other interesting part of this, right? There was such a drastic difference between Jared Goff under Jeff Fisher and Jared Goff under Sean McVay that there was a logical conclusion to draw that was Sean McVay really elevating him, setting him up for success. Mm-hmm. And now it's gone back sort of in between those two, where it's not Jeff Fisher bad, but it's also not anywhere near the quarterback he was at the beginning under McVay. I also find that part of this really intriguing, of how do you evaluate this, because it's we're sort of to a point where there's not really a pattern. Mm-hmm. Right. No sort of trajectory to follow, no theme to follow to sort of figure out what's going on with Jared Goff. This is probably the quarterback he is. I still contend that's good enough to win a Super Bowl if you've got enough talent around him. But there's also the reality that one bad performance at the wrong time ends your season.
Sure.
That's true of any team, but
I don't think this version of Jared Goff is good enough to win a Super Bowl. The version of Jared Goff you got the Super Bowl season was good enough to win a Super Bowl. Somewhere in between what you have now and what you had then is good enough to win a Super Bowl. But there are 8 teams, 8 quarterbacks that I would probably pick. Maybe not 8, but if you rattle them off, I mean, at least this season, I still take Russell Wilson over him in his own division. You still take Patrick Mahomes. You still take Big Ben in this particular season, I think. So there's Rodgers. So then you go Rodgers, you go Breeze. I still think Josh Allen. I still think, Deshaun Watson is a quarterback that you can win a Super Bowl with, I think.
Absolutely.
Right. To talk about guys that aren't in a situation to win Super Bowls right now, but that you think you could win Super Bowls with. Right. That's the unfortunate reality of Jared Goff's situation, is that, listen, you don't get the benefit of the doubt that you could do it when your team's good enough, because I don't think there's any doubt that the roster that the Rams have is good enough to do it. It's just, right, as we talked about yesterday, about how the quarterback position might be slightly overrated, but in terms of, if you had to pick one position that you have to be good at to win a Super Bowl, the answer is quarterback. Which is not a groundbreaking thing to say, but still. Coming up next, we're going to talk bold predictions for the 2020-2021 NBA season. We'll do that next. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.